topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, hello and welcome. Bill Martinez here. Good to have you with us. And for those of you that have been following us, you know that radio has been a big part of my life. I've been associated with particularly, rock music and radio for 50 plus years, and been very blessed, even serving in the Marine Corps. I did the version of Good Morning Camp Pendleton. I say to people that not as funny as Robin Williams, certainly. I probably would have gotten dishonorably discharged if I came anywhere close to the humor and the antics of one Robin Williams as portrayed in the movie. But regardless, it was, a fun ride in the Marine Corps for a couple of years, and an honor to serve the country in that capacity during the closing days and months and years of the Vietnam War. But all that to say is that radio has been a big part of my life and my history. And when I connected with our next guest, Richard Syrett, he's an infamous podcaster and rock and roll historian, I say. And his new book, I said, I can't wait to get my hands on it. Tales from the Rock and Roll Twilight Zone. All these stories of rock music and the artists that, I grew up with and played many times on the radio and wondered and had question about. Richard has been fighting the good fight on our behalf, and the thing is about people who delve into conspiracies, we're all, I guess there's an attempt to invalidate us, but nonetheless, people are very curious by the information that we're able to pull out until, one day they realize, they go, wow, what Bill and Richard have been talking about actually did happen, and there's no conspiracy about it. It's for real. Richard Syrett, welcome back. Good to be talking to you again, my friend. How are you?
Hey, Bill, I'm great. Thanks for having me back on.
Well, this is awesome because we have a little bit more time in which to have an opportunity to do a deeper dive into your book as you pull back the curtain, as we say, on the shadowy, often ignored side of rock history, where sudden deaths, cultural shifts, larger than life personas intersect with unanswered questions, right?
Absolutely. It's a fertile ground, a rich vein to be mined for sure.
Well, without a doubt. So let's talk about, why the book Tales from Rock and Roll and Twilight Zone. How did this come about? Go ahead.
Well, first of all, like you, I mean, this music is or was the soundtrack of my life. I guess continues to be for my generation, for yours, and many others. So I've always been steeped in the appreciation for the music, and I always had nagging questions. When I read about how Jimi Hendrix died, or whether Brian Jones actually just drowned in a swimming pool, death by misadventure, or Elvis being found in his bathroom at Graceland. What was that all about? Did it happen exactly the way we're told? Because I grew up in the era of Watergate, and then 9/11 and COVID, and obviously there's a great deal of apprehension when it comes to the official narrative, whether it's from a government institution or the mainstream media. So I've always had these questions. And then I got into radio, and I had to figure out how I was going to fill 2 hours of airtime. And I didn't want to talk about, provincial budgets or the garbage strike in the city of Toronto. Not that those aren't important, but there are other people to talk about those and do a better job. Mm-hmm. Right. I've always been fascinated by the questions that many of us have, but never really had a platform. And, sort of what lies beneath in the subterranean world, what's really going on behind the headlines, between the lines that we're not being told. And so I just combined my love for the music, my love for rock history, and started asking, questions and scratching at things and pulling on threads. And eventually it resulted in this book, but it was a podcast first. It was about 40 episodes we did back in 2018 in conjunction with Chris Jericho, and I pulled 16 episodes from the 40 that I produced and distilled them into the chapters for this book.
So, Richard, as you were growing up, would your parents say that you were quite the curious kid?
Oh, yeah. I was the youngest of 5. And we were encouraged, to ask questions. And I grew up watching In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy and all of those, terrific programs. So I guess, it didn't come as a surprise to people in my family that this is the track that I eventually traveled.
Well, and I think this is one of the things we look at in today's culture that I believe is missing, critical thinking. You just touched on, some of the processes that you went through. Number one, critical thinking and having that curiosity, not necessarily just taking what's being said, especially from government officials, more and more as we're realizing that everything's politically motivated and comes in a political filter, which as soon as you do that, you invalidate the truth. You really compromise the truth. And any truth compromised is no longer the truth, right?
Absolutely. And I don't claim to possess the truth. I'm simply, scrambling around in the dark like everyone else, asking questions. And ultimately, it's up to the reader to decide, was Elvis Presley in fact murdered? Which of course may come as a shock to many people. Many people are still operating onto the fantasy or the rumor that Elvis is, flipping burgers in Kalamazoo. He faked his death. This chapter comes at it from a completely different perspective, which is, in fact, Elvis was murdered. So, that's one example. Jimi Hendrix, so many unanswered questions about, the way he died. We're told, barbiturate poisoning and then basically aspirated on his vomit after drinking red wine. But if you go back and you look at the documents and what hospital staff were saying there, in London, that his hair was soaked with wine, his lungs were filled with wine. There was no there was no wine in the stomach, which suggests perhaps one possibility is that wine was poured down Jimi Hendrix's nose, similar to waterboarding, that he was murdered.
Yeah. Wow. That's and there's so many more stories like this that when you're curious and ask the questions and you don't take for granted what the narrative that's put out there, because it's not so much what you need to know as much as what they want you to know. Right.
Yeah, I think we're starting to figure it out that much of our reality is being programmed for us. It's sort of top down, and we're being told what to think, how to think, and what not to ask. If you ask the wrong questions, we don't have gulags like they did in the Soviet Union, but I think we have something here in the West that's just as effective, maybe even more effective, and that is ostracizing people, discrediting people, ad hominem attacks, and then mainly just denying people a platform. The mainstream media just ignores you. So that's the way that narratives get shaped. That narratives get shaped, I think, in the West.
Well, the other thing, because the way the culture has been animated here, to your point, is that it's really gone to the extreme, because beyond just canceling and invalidating you, you're defunded. Whatever ways that you have to earn a living are taken away. You're deprived of that. Worse yet, you're spoken of in such terms that you're considered evil and worthy to be exterminated, right?
That is a sad truth, unfortunately. I figured it out very early on in my career that I was sort of slotted into late night radio where I could do the least amount of damage, I suppose. And I've always worked.
So they thought, but little did they know how many millions of people are up late at night just looking for a good conversation or something interesting, right?
Exactly. And that's where these questions and these stories really flourish, is late night radio, because, daytime radio can be challenging to get your message across. I mean, you're an incredibly skilled broadcaster.
You're very kind.
And so you understand how, that you're competing with maybe the people listening in the car. They're carpooling to work and they're having a conversation, and you're trying to vie for their attention. What I discovered with late night radio is that you have the listener's undivided attention. There may be, maybe they're lying in bed and they're, bathed in the glow of the radio dial, and they're just listening to you and no one else and nothing else. And they're focused on what you're saying. So thank God for late night radio and platforms like Coast to Coast AM, where I'm honored to fill in from time to time. So that's where these stories really take flight. And
what I loved about late night radio, Richard, is the fact that management didn't seem to care a whole lot. They'd say, "Oh, that's just Martinez. He's getting crazy. Just leave him alone. It's late at night. It's not going to bother anybody. You might have an occasional sponsor get animated and stuff like that. But, if you animate a sponsor in prime time, morning drive or afternoon drive, you could pay some consequences and with your career, right?"
That's true, but I came to terms with it, and I'm at peace with it, and I've come to love late night radio. The only thing I sort of not regret, but I'm working in terrestrial radio on the overnight shift. I felt like a ghost, walking through the halls. There was maybe a security guard, the board op, and myself, and that was it. And so I sort of missed the camaraderie of other, the hustle and bustle of being in the radio station when the news people were there and the sales people. It's a fair trade-off, though. So, being a ghost is kind of fitting for the topics that I cover, the paranormal and a lot of ghosts, obviously, in the rock and roll field as well that we discuss.
Yeah, and we'll get into that a little bit more. So here it is, your work on Strange Planet, and then Coast to Coast AM. Like you say, you're talking late night and getting into these things where you're kind of, the handcuffs are off. You're not restricted. You're able to, put it out there in such a way to an audience that is very receptive. And as you said, that you've captured their attention. And, maybe tell our audience a little bit more about your story with Strange Planet and Coast to Coast.
Well, let's see where to begin. In the early 2000s, I started working behind the microphone. Before that, I was producing talk radio for many years. Started talking about, up here in Canada, we didn't have a Coast to Coast or an Art Bell per se. So, that was kind of a lane that was open to me to discuss those things. And I was fascinated by those things. So that sort of took over my show, the paranormal, UFOs, conspiracies. Of course, 9/11 came along. I devoted many hours to talking about that. Eventually, I moved to another radio station, and it was the conspiracy show was born. That became a television show. After the television show, I decided to do some podcasting. I was kind of a late adapter to podcasting. In 2017, I started Strange Planet. It drops 3 days a week, again, covering the same kind of terrain that we do on Coast to Coast, UFOs, conspiracies, alternative history, archaeology, you name it, alternative energy. And then in 2018, I started the Rock and Roll Twilight Zone, sort of dealing exclusively with rock legends and curses and conspiracies and the occult and, occult symbols and all the rest. And, mysterious deaths and so forth. And then the Rock and Roll Twilight Zone had its run of 40 episodes, and people were saying, "Syrett, when are you going to write a book? Come on, where's your book?" And I thought, what am I going to write about? So I thought, well, the Rock and Roll Twilight Zone, let's sort of repurpose that and turn that into a book. It's not just I didn't just transcribe the 16 out of the 40 episodes. I kind of rewrote it and reimagined it and gave it kind of a cinematic narrative, preserved the quotes from these great experts, rock journalists and people who were there back in the day in the 60s and 70s. Jimi Hendrix roadie, for example, James Tappy Wright. I leaned heavily on him for the Jimi Hendrix episode. So it's all in the book. And there was, it was a real journey starting out in the early days in radio to this book. It's my first book. It's very personal. I'm proud of it, and so delighted to now be promoting it on your show.
Well, I got to tell you, what you have done is such a blessing. For those of us who have been in rock radio, have played the music, have heard the stories, delved into some of the conspiracies, but not like you. I mean, you have done it in such a depth that this is, quite the reveal. And interesting, because I've spoken with a couple of my former DJ colleagues, and talked about your book, and they were just totally fascinated. And where can I get the book? I go, well, it's not exactly for sale yet, but it's available for pre-order, right?
That's right. Yep. Or Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I think even on Walmart, Indigo. Wow. You can order it through the publisher, tryingday.com. It's available for pre-order, and I hope people do pre-order. I'm new to this business, but I'm told that pre-orders are really essential, right, in order to gain some traction here. Now, I'd love to be on the New York Times bestseller list. I don't know if that's possible, but I'd like to get the word out and get this book in as many hands as we can.
As much as it would count on us, Richard, we're with you on this deal. All right, let's talk about which case in the tales from the Rock and Roll Twilight Zone surprised you the most during your research?
Wow. I think there was some shockers in every case that I investigated, but I'll just give you one example to begin with. Brian Jones, of course, who was the heart and soul of the Rolling Stones. He founded the Rolling Stones. It was his band for all intents and purposes. All those flamboyant outfits that Mick now wears and Keith was wearing in the 70s. That was Brian Jones. They took that from Brian. The dance steps and everything. The problem was Brian Jones was not a singer and he wasn't a writer. He wanted a blues band, but then they had new management. They wanted Keith and Mick to write songs. Brian couldn't keep up. Very fragile, vulnerable individual. Didn't handle his booze or his drugs very well. And so he became so ineffectual that Keith and Mick showed up at his home, Cochford Farm in Sussex, England. Cochford Farm, of course, was the estate owned by A.A. Milne, the author of Winnie the Pooh. And so Keith and Mick show up and tell Brian in, late June, early July of 1969, that's it. You're done. You're out of the band. Sorry. So he just kind of fell apart. And we're told that early July of 1969, he's found at the bottom of a swimming pool. Death by misadventure, case closed. Oh. But as I discovered in talking to some researchers and investigators, there was a lot of nefarious characters that were hanging around the house that night, including the Rolling Stones fixer, a guy by the name of Tom Keylock, who had been recently fired by Keith Richards because Keylock was basically skimming from the Rolling Stones, and if Keith was ordering furniture, Keylock would order it, but he'd order himself some as well. And anyway, he gets fired, but then he gravitates to Brian Jones because he figures, this guy's ripe for the taking. I'm just going to scam this guy. So he's hanging out there. Turns out Thomas Keylock's brother, Frank Keylock, was a detective or a superintendent with Scotland Yard. And Thomas Keylock was present the night that Brian Jones was found at the bottom of his swimming pool, as were a bunch of tradespeople. Cochford Farm was under constant renovation and remodeling, and they also figured that this young 27-year-old Brian Jones, who was, drinking heavily and popping pills and so forth, they could scam him as well. And Brian tried desperately to get rid of these people, to fire them because they weren't really doing the work, but he couldn't. And so there was some animosity, some anger, and people can read the book and find out what may have happened. But this idea that it was simply, Brian maybe drinking too much or taking too many pills and then drowning, it doesn't quite add up when you consider that Brian was an excellent swimmer. He was an excellent diver. And so it doesn't add up. But the other important fact here is that when he died, the autopsy was not performed by the local medical examiner in Sussex. Prime Minister Heath, the Prime Minister in England at the time, his medical examiner decided to intervene and do the autopsy. And he was the one that ruled that this was death by misadventure. But there's plenty of evidence to suggest that Brian Jones was murdered, whether it was manslaughter or like intended or unintended. But there was someone involved directly in his death, whether it was Keelock, whether it was some of these tradespeople that were there that night. We're not exactly sure, but there's far more to this story. This is not a simple case of, fading rock star gets drunk and drowns in his own pool.
Right. Well, our conversations with Richard Syrett, the host of the popular and critically acclaimed podcast, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. We're talking about his new book, soon to come out, now available for pre-order. And we want to up the pre-order. Pre-orders are really important in the world of books and that. So we want to do everything we can to support Richard and his efforts. He's put a lot of work into this, and it's just absolutely fascinating. You talk about the Brian Jones narrative and the misadventures. I mean, that's almost a TV series in and of itself. But there's so many other, crazy narratives around the deaths of artists, right?
Well, another one that comes to mind that's in the book is Kurt Cobain, who supposedly died by his own hand, shotgun, in April of 1994. Now, it's in the news again because there are some forensic researchers who have approached King County in Washington, that's Seattle, and want this case reopened. King County has basically said, no, it's case closed. We're satisfied it was suicide. But again, and I'm leaning on some terrific researchers and authors who have been on this case since the very beginning. And the idea that Kurt Cobain, first of all, he was found with almost 10 times the lethal dose of morphine. Well, he supposedly was taking heroin, which metabolizes into morphine once it hits the body, something like 10 times the lethal dose in his body. So we're expected to believe that after injecting himself 3 times with heroin, which any other human being would have been rendered unconscious within seconds, right, he's then able to neatly put away his drug paraphernalia, including putting the caps back on the needles, putting them in their case, placing them to the side. He then takes this shotgun and, I hate to be graphic, but sticks it in his mouth and blows his brains out.
Right.
No blood splatter to be found. And again, I don't know, if you've held a shotgun with a long barrel, but not only the barrel, but not a silencer, but there was an attachment on the end of the barrel. So now to turn that around and be able to reach the trigger and while the barrel's in your mouth, it just doesn't add up. It doesn't make any sense. Then there's the supposed suicide note, which contains several different styles of writing in the suicide note. And we know from Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love's lawyer, Rosemary Carroll, and the investigator that Courtney Love hired after Kurt's death, Tom Grant. We know from Rosemary and Tom Grant that Courtney Love, and these are allegations, never been proven in court, and she denies them, but she was practicing Kurt's handwriting. And the suicide note actually reads more like the first part of it, like a kind of a love letter to his fans, perhaps explaining why he's thinking about, quitting Nirvana and moving on. He never wanted to be the voice of a generation. He detested that kind of branding and commercialization. So the first part of the letter, you could maybe suggest, oh, he's saying goodbye, not to his fans, but to the world. He's going to kill himself. But then this different handwriting at the end where he starts talking about his daughter, Frances Bean, and Courtney Love, and as if he's saying goodbye to them as well. So then it was concluded that this was a suicide letter, but that's very problematic as well. So again, so many unanswered questions. It doesn't add up that Kurt Cobain committed suicide.
And interesting that his case is being reopened.
There's a research team, forensic investigators who are trying to get it reopened, and this was just covered in the Daily Mail, I think, back in February. Mm-hmm. But as it stands right now, I don't know if it's the attorney's office in King County are saying, no, we're not reopening. But who knows? They're saying unless there's new evidence that comes forward. Well, there's plenty of evidence,
right.
Plenty of evidence.
Well, let's talk Beatles. Who killed Paul McCartney?
I know that whole Paul is dead legend. Some people might say, well, that's pretty shop worn. That's been around forever. It's true. It's been around since 1969. Mm-hmm. I'm not arguing actually that Paul was necessarily replaced by a lookalike after he supposedly died in a car crash in November of 1966. I look at this as almost from a sociological angle. Remember in 1969 when the rumor started that Paul McCartney was dead and that the Beatles had left all these breadcrumbs and clues in their lyrics and backward masking in their records, right, and clues on the album covers of Sgt. Pepper and Abbey Road and Magical Mystery Tour. This rumor started a generation before the advent of the internet. Mm-hmm. It was word of mouth. Somebody writes an article for the college newspaper in Iowa, Des Moines, Iowa, the university campus there. Mm-hmm. Someone then reads that article, calls Russ Gibb, the DJ at a Detroit radio station, starts talking about all of these clues. Russ Gibb had never heard of it before. All of a sudden, the studio lines start lighting up. They're talking about Paul is dead. Paul is dead. Here are the clues. Listen to Strawberry Fields backwards, and he says, I buried Paul. Listen to Revolution number 9.
Paul is dead.
Turn me on, dead man. Turn me on, dead man, and so forth. Mm-hmm. Look at the funereal motifs on Sgt. Pepper, and all of this. And then it goes on to New York, and they call Roby Young, who was a very popular DJ. And in those days, that station in New York covered about 40 states. The lines light up and they're talking to Roby Young about Paul is dead. Roby Young suspends his music format to take calls live on the air. Program right. director comes in, fires him on the air. Mm-hmm. And this rumor just spreads like wildfire, right. And persists to this day, nearly 60 years later.
You see, what people don't understand, I forgive me for interrupting you, because this is just my business. I know. I mean, leave it for radio to fire somebody for getting big ratings.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You broke with format.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. But anyway, go ahead.
So, and here we go. 60 years later, the rumor is still out there. People are still, scouring Beatles lyrics for clues. Of course, people talk about, the tremendous song called A Day in the Life. He blew his mind out in a car. He hadn't noticed that the light had changed. Well, that is, according to the legend, Paul McCartney and George Harrison, Ringo Starr, George Martin are in the studio recording tracks for Sgt. Pepper. John Lennon is away in Spain. He's filming a movie called How I Won the War. So the pressure's on McCartney. George Martin says, we need another song, or I'm sorry, Brian Epstein, I think it was. We need another song. McCartney storms out of Abbey Road, jumps in his Aston Martin, picks up a hitchhiker. It's raining out. The hitchhiker, her name is Rita, apparently, who this may have inspired the song Lovely Rita, Meter Maid.
Yes, right.
All of a sudden, Rita looks over and realizes that the person who just picked her up is none other than Paul McCartney. She freaks out. She starts flailing her arms. Paul McCartney is trying to calm her down, blows right through a red light, and is smacked by a lorry, as they call them in the UK, a big truck. And the car is just smashed beyond recognition. The rumor is that McCartney was in fact decapitated. That happened November 9th, 1966, according to the legend. The head honchos at EMI assemble quickly and decide we have to keep this gravy train running. I mean, imagine this is post-war England. England is economically, it's in the dumps. The Beatles, arguably, one of their greatest exports at this point.
Exactly.
So, again, the rumor is that maybe members of the British government get involved and say, we can't allow Paul McCartney to die and the Beatles to dissolve. Just replace them. And so somehow they managed to find a left-handed bass player who arguably was more talented than the original Paul McCartney. I mean, when you look at the body of work of Paul McCartney after 1966, Let It Be, Hey Jude, The Long and Winding Road, the list goes on, just, masterpieces. Right. So to me, that's where this whole legend kind of falls apart. I find it hard to believe they found, again, a left-handed bass player who looked enough like McCartney that was more talented than the original. But then the theory is that this is why they stopped touring in 1966 and wrapped it up at Shea Stadium in New York, never to tour again, because now they had the fake Paul, or faux Paul, as some refer to him. Right. So let's hide him in studio. Now he's growing the mustache. Maybe they did a little bit of cosmetic surgery just to make sure that, people wouldn't find out. And then the Beatles, John, George, and Ringo, the surviving Beatles, decide, let's leave some clues. Maybe they were feeling guilty about it and wanted the public to sort of connect the dots, or maybe they were doing it in tongue-in-cheek. I think it was kind of a marketing ploy. Again, Paul McCartney.
One of the most brilliant marketing ploys, I think, in modern history when you think about it, because look what happened right after that. The record sales for Beatles. That was back in the days when we were still selling records, just without charts.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And again, here we are still talking about it 60 years later. So, and if you hear the song from Sgt. Pepper where they say, what would you do if I sang out of tune? Would you get up and walk out on me? Ringo Starr singing this from I Get By With a Little Help from My Friends. Is this a confession from the Beatles? What would you do if I sang out of key or I sang out of tune?
Right.
In other words, I'm not Paul. I'm the replacement. And again, there are just so many fascinating clues. I mean, we could probably talk for hours and, walk through all the different clues.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm with you on it. In fact, even now with AI, there was a run of, Paul McCartney being in the hospital. He's on a ventilator. I mean, all kinds of stuff. And you're going, enough already. Just let him die.
Well, of course, back then they didn't have AI, but there was some Italian researchers who did some photo comparisons. They looked at some photographs of Paul McCartney with his then girlfriend, Jane Asher, pre-1966, and then pictures of Paul McCartney post 1966 after he supposedly died. And you can see, these photo analysts say, it's not the same person. The Paul McCartney with Jane Asher in 1966, he's maybe 5'10", she's, 5'5". So he's, he is a little bit taller. But then when you see him in 1967, I think there were photos at Brian Epstein's place to launch Sgt. Pepper. McCartney is much taller than 5'10". They looked at the wear on the teeth. They did all of these sorts of analyses, and their conclusion was that it's not the same Paul McCartney.
Interesting.
There was also a gentleman in Miami who did vocal print analysis. I guess he ran these waveforms through spectroanalysis or whatever it's called, and he concluded that there were 3 different songs, and he concluded those were 3 different individuals singing those songs. One was the original Paul McCartney, pre-66. I think the other vocal print was from The Long and Winding Road. That was different than the vocal print for another track. So, is Paul McCartney a chameleon? Were these 3 different people singing Paul's music? This individual, again from Miami, his name escapes me, but it's in the book. He was asked to present his findings on television, and he didn't show up. Now, you could say, well, he he wasn't willing to stand up for what he believed in, or you could also argue, I don't know, maybe was he threatened? Was he bribed to, silence can become sort of this blank canvas, and you can impose your own narrative on it, if you will. But there has been some interesting forensic investigations of this rumor.
Richard, Syrett, there's, you kind of alluded to this a moment ago, and that is everything post-World War has become an industrial complex. The whole rock and roll genre in and of itself has become an industrial complex, that you've got string pullers, in all directions and all phases, whether it's in Hollywood, coast to coast, New York, and, in Detroit, and on and on. It reminds me of, you talk about hints, like Charlie Daniels' song, "The Devil Went Down to Georgia," and how some of these artists may have sold their souls to the devil himself, all in conjunction with these powerful institutions that are string pullers for these artists.
Yes, I dedicated a chapter to sort of the granddaddy of that whole selling one's soul to the devil. And that began with Robert Johnson, the great Delta blues artist in the 1930s, who supposedly was in Clarksdale, Mississippi. He was a sharecropper looking, to bust out of that misery, and wanted to play the blues. Supposedly met Old Scratch, as the devil is known down south, Old Scratch at the crossroads of Highway 61 and Highway 49, the intersection there in Clarksdale, Mississippi, and made that pact with the devil. Now, it's interesting because he was, by all accounts, according to Delta musicians like Son House, a very famous bluesman down there, Robert Johnson was at best a mediocre guitarist, and was kind of hanging around Son House and some of the other musicians, and they kind of found Robert Johnson to be kind of an annoyance. And they were trying to shake him, say, get out of here, kid. Well, he went away. He disappeared for about a year. Mm-hmm. And when he came back, Son House and his gang saw Robert Johnson playing in this gin joint down in Mississippi, and was playing the most incredible blues they had ever heard. And they thought, how is this humanly possible?
Right.
And Son House believed that Robert Johnson had, in fact, made a deal with the devil. Robert Johnson never out and out said that, but he sings about it. He talks about, the crossroads, and he talks about, practicing in cemeteries late at night. And he talks about how there were hellhounds on his trail. And when Robert Johnson died, he was supposedly poisoned. He made a rookie mistake. He took a drink from an open bottle of liquor that was shared with him. And he was a bit of a rounder, Robert Johnson. He was, having affairs with other people. There were a lot of jealous husbands out there. The rumor is that someone put arsenic in his whiskey bottle. He drank it and he died in excruciating pain, and was basically on his knees howling like a wild animal when he finally died. So was that his fulfilling his contract with Old Scratch, right, that he would find fame, not necessarily fortune, but the bill was due.
Interesting. And the cries of the demonic leaving his mortal body, I guess, maybe as well.
Perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. But, what other, institutions, whether it's, Motown, you had these, these companies that, boy, own these artists. I mean, even to these days, particularly in the rap world, that we find out more and more, right?
Well, it does sound like there is a machine behind these artists And they get certain directives. I mean, I've seen on YouTube young rap artists, and that's not a particularly that's not a genre that I particularly enjoy or watch, but I have seen interviews with some of these young rappers talking about how they don't want to sing or rap about gangsters and hoes and all of this, which is really debasing to the human spirit, I think. And many of them feel the same way, but they feel trapped. They are told you have to sing about this, where they'd rather sing something more uplifting, but they are told. Now, what is the purpose of that? It seems as if the culture is being programmed from above, and this is, a deliberate attempt to change hearts and minds. But that's nothing new. I mean, the first chapter in the book about the Beatles asks the question, was the Beatle invasion just this organic cultural phenomena that happened, or was it engineered, manufactured just to a certain extent? Was the British invasion actually a British invasion, a British military psyop designed to corrupt the youth in America, who are obviously looking for some kind of joy and respite from the grief of having their president murdered just a couple of months earlier.
Right.
And so the timing of the British invasion is interesting. There was a Time magazine headline that came out just after the Beatles' appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show, said something to the effect, in 1776, the British lost the American colonies. Last night on the Ed Sullivan Show, the British took them back. Maybe there's more to that than just a clever headline.
Right. It's interesting, when you consider the sociological implications, again, the creativity of men, and especially when you're in that position to control, that kind of talent. But who would have projected that four shaggy-haired guys from England would make the impact that they made? It's just phenomenal.
Well, and I don't want to discount. I mean, I love the Beatles. They are, they will be played on whatever we call radio stations in 100 years. Their music will live on for 100 years. They are the Mozarts and the Mendelssohns of, the 20th century. Right. I'm not discounting their talent, but someone got behind them. I mean, I don't know about you, but Bill, but I go into a subway and I see the most phenomenal musicians busking. You're right. And I'm thinking, why aren't these people famous? Why aren't they rich? Why aren't they living in, Rosedale here in Toronto, a very swanky area? It's because they don't have the machine behind them. Mm-hmm. So the Beatles were talented, but they had a machine behind them. And there's also some who suggest that there was more than just a machine. They also had institutions like the Tavistock Institute behind them, who were using the Beatles. As I say in the book, the British basically replaced muskets and redcoats with Rickenbacker guitars and great harmonies and melodies to try and take back the colony and to corrupt the youth and seduce them into sex and drugs and rebellion and questioning everything, which of course happened after the Beatles washed ashore in '64. A few years later, those innocent songs about "She Loves You," yeah, quickly turned into, "Lucy in the Sky and Diamonds" and psychedelia and questioning everything.
Mm-hmm. No, there's no question as you go down through the timeline and the impact that the Beatles had. If there was, this kind of force behind him, what a brilliant strategy. But if nothing else, it's almost like a test marketing plan. What else would America, as consumers, what else would they be vulnerable to, right?
Well, exactly. I mean, the Tavistock Institute in London, I go back to that, was formed after the Second World War. Initially, it was supposed to take in shell-shocked veterans and try and heal them and rebuild their shattered psyches. Mm-hmm. But the suggestion is that quickly turned from, treating World War II veterans to focusing on the population at large. And how can we tear them down, tear down their psyche, tear down their belief systems, and rebuild them according to, our needs and our wants. So again, this like a major psychological operation on populations. And I know I happen to believe that major institutions and intelligence groups, this has always been their design. You need to find a way to control and steer a population in order to maintain stability or social cohesion. And one could rationalize that to a certain point. But I think in the case of the Beatles, it's possible that these organizations, the Tavistock, maybe MI6, the British Crown, saw a way of softening up the American psyche at a most vulnerable time in their history.
Exactly.
And that's where it went.
That's a great point. We got about 4.5 minutes left here. I did want to cover, these artists who have died so young, and they're all part of the 27 Club, right?
Right. Well, that began with Robert Johnson, who died at 27, although, no one started to make a connection between all of these artists dying mysteriously, coincidentally at the age of 27 until we had starting in 69 with Brian Jones, died at 27. Then in 1970, Janis Joplin died at 27. Jimi Hendrix died at 27. And then finally in 71, Jim Morrison died at 27. So, what is that all about? Why are people dying at 27? Did they make some pact with the devil? And, the 27 Club is not limited to those individuals. Kurt Cobain died at 27, which kind of reignited the whole legend, because after Jimmy Morrison and Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix died, people sort of forgot about it for a while, because it was, 25 years before Kurt Cobain died. And then when Amy Winehouse died in the 2000s,
right,
that whole legend, again, 27 years old, got revved up again. I don't know. I'm a Christian. I believe in an unseen world. I believe that the devil is real, that he is the prince of this world, that he ultimately has a great deal of sway and influence and decides to a certain extent what happens on this planet. So is it possible that, there was some demonic influence there? It is possible. A more prosaic explanation might be that when you look at musicians who break into the industry in their early 20s, by the time they reach 27, they are sort of at the peak of their artistic performance. They are under incredible pressure to produce and perform. They are on these relentless, exhaustive touring schedules. They are, perhaps giving in to certain pressures and temptations, taking drugs, drinking too much alcohol. It adds up to a really dangerous cocktail, which, may account for why so many of them are dying in and around that precise age of 27. It's just a confluence of factors. And I think that has some validity to that argument.
Right. Well, as we wrap things up, Richard Syrett, what do you hope readers take away from this new book?
I hope that they continue to appreciate the music, love the music. I'm not trying to tear down any of these artists or musicians. Again, the music is the soundtrack of my life, continues to be. But there are so many unanswered questions, and I hope ultimately just readers come away with wanting to ask more questions and have a healthy, skepticism is important. It's important to ask questions, but to dismiss everything out of hand to me is just laziness. So I want people to be skeptical, but to continue asking questions.
Richard Syrett, the infamous podcaster and rock and roll historian. We've been talking about his new book, Tales from the Rock and Roll Twilight Zone. It is now available in terms of, pre-release. You can pre-order it, right?
Right. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, from the publisher, trineday.com. More information on the website, therockandrolltwilightsone.com. All one word, therockandrolltwilightsone.com.
Richard Syrett, thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate you. Take care.
Bill, thank you. Great pleasure.
Well, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for sharing a part of your day with us. May God bless you and keep you. May make his face shine upon you. May be gracious unto you and give you peace. God bless you. Take care.